The most dangerous moment for your enemy is the second they realize you were never playing the same game. Read that again. Let it sink in. Because this is exactly where you are right now. They spent years sizing you up wrong, talking down, laughing, competing with a version of you that no longer exists. They convinced themselves you were manageable, predictable, beatable, an easy opponent. Someone they could always stay ahead of just by being louder, faster, or crueler. And then something shifted. Not overnight, not loudly, not in a way they could track. But now, when they look at you, something feels off. Their confidence doesn't sit right anymore. Their jokes land flat. Their superiority feels forced. Because deep down, they've sensed the truth before they fully understand it. You didn't just improve, you outgrew the arena. This isn't about ego. This isn't about revenge. This is about hierarchy changing without permission. And that's what hits them the hardest. The real reason your longtime opponent feels unworthy isn't because you attacked them. It's because you stopped needing to. You became the kind of presence that doesn't argue for dominance. It simply occupies it, like gravity, like silence in a room full of noise, like a chessboard where one player suddenly realizes the other has been thinking 10 moves ahead the entire time. You can feel it, can't you? That moment where they hesitate now, where they watch instead of speak, where their energy shifts from mockery to measurement. That's not confidence on their side anymore. That's recalculation. That's someone realizing the person they underestimated has crossed a line they can't follow. And if you're wondering, why does this feel uncomfortable? Why does this feel heavy instead of satisfying? Here's the answer. Because being chosen isn't about celebration. It's about responsibility. Chosen ones don't rise loudly, they rise precisely. They absorb pressure instead of reacting to it. They turn resistance into refinement. While others were trying to win arguments, you were upgrading your position. While they were watching you, you were watching patterns. While they were obsessed with beating you, you were focused on becoming unreachable. That's why the power shift feels sudden to them and gradual to you. They didn't see the quiet hours, the restraint, the moments you could have responded but didn't. They mistook your patience for weakness and your silence for submission. That miscalculation is now costing them psychologically, because nothing is more destabilizing than realizing the person you looked down on no longer sees you at all. This is where their mind starts racing. When did this happen? How did they get here? Was I ever actually ahead? Those questions don't get answered. They echo. And that's the surprise they weren't prepared for. The reason they feel unworthy now isn't your success. It's the realization that your growth invalidated the entire story they told themselves about you. You didn't climb past them. You stepped outside their frame of reference. It's like shadowboxing someone who left the building an hour ago. You're not dealing with a rivalry anymore. You're dealing with an identity collapse on their side, because their sense of importance depended on you staying small. Your evolution removed their role. And when someone loses their role, they panic. That's why they watch quietly now. That's why they imitate. That's why they fluctuate between admiration and resentment. They're trying to understand how the person they once dismissed became someone they now measure themselves against. And here's what you need to understand, chosen one, because this is where many people get it wrong. Your job is not to explain. Your job is not to soften yourself. Your job is not to reassure people who misjudged you. Your job is to stay aligned with the version of yourself that made them uncomfortable in the first place. Being chosen means you were built to carry weight others drop. It means pressure sharpens you instead of breaking you. It means you don't peak loudly, you compound quietly. And when the results finally show, they don't just speak, they confront. That's why your presence feels heavier now. That's why your silence lands harder than their words ever did. You didn't win by fighting them. You won by becoming someone they can't access, can't provoke, and can't compete with anymore. So if you're feeling the tension, the distance, the shift in how they treat you, understand this. That's not conflict. That's recognition arriving late. They finally see you for what you are. Not an opponent, not a rival, but someone who changed the rules without announcing it. And that's why, whether they admit it or not, you've already won the only battle that mattered. Before we move any further, take a moment to support what's being built here. If this message is hitting home, like this video so it reaches more people who need it. Subscribe to the channel if you're ready to stay connected to content that pushes you forward, not backward. And if you want to help us keep delivering these high-impact, motivating, life-changing messages, consider showing support through Super Thanks. Every contribution fuels the effort, the research, and the energy behind these videos. Your support helps us keep raising the standard and bringing you content that actually moves you. Number 1, they came looking for the old you and met a different league. They came for a familiar fight and walked into a different class. They trained to beat the version of you that no longer exists. That's the mistake they can't recover from. They showed up expecting the old dynamics, the old reactions, the old limits, same tone, same smirk, same confidence they borrowed from a past where they thought they had you figured out. In their mind, this was a rerun, a predictable scene where they already knew the ending. What they didn't realize is that while they were replaying old footage, you were living in a new season. This is where the shock hits them. Because the first thing they notice isn't your success, it's your posture, the way you don't rush, the way you don't explain, the way your presence doesn't lean forward anymore, trying to prove or persuade. You're standing back now, grounded, balanced, watching. And that's when their confidence starts slipping, because confidence collapses when it can't get a reaction. You didn't change leagues loudly. You changed internally first. You stopped showing your work. You stopped responding on their timeline. You stopped giving access to your emotional controls. While they were sharpening insults, you were sharpening judgment. While they were preparing arguments, you were preparing exits. And now they're standing in front of you, realizing the contest they trained for doesn't exist anymore. They came ready to compete. You came already completed. And if you're wondering, why do they seem uneasy around me now? Why do they hesitate? It's because they feel the gap before they understand it. Like stepping onto an escalator that's moving faster than expected. Their body knows before their mind catches up. Something is off. Something is misaligned. They're swinging, but the distance is wrong. The timing is wrong. The power balance has shifted. That's what it means to be chosen. Not chosen in a mythical sense. Chosen by pressure. Chosen by repetition. Chosen by the quiet decision to keep going when nothing was applauding you. Chosen because you adapted while others stayed performative. You didn't get louder to survive. You got sharper. They thought you were playing the same game with fewer resources. That's why they felt superior. What they missed is that you stopped playing altogether and started building leverage. It's the difference between sparring and training, between flexing and compounding, between noise and momentum. Here's the part that really hits them hard. You're not angry anymore. They were prepared for resentment. They were prepared for defensiveness. They were prepared for you to bring up the past so they could dismiss it. But you didn't bring anything. You didn't need to. Your calm did the talking. Your restraint did the damage. Because nothing unsettles an opponent like realizing they no longer live rent-free in your mind. They used to provoke you to feel powerful. Now your indifference makes them feel invisible. And invisibility is unbearable to people who built their identity on being above you. So let's address what might be crossing your mind right now. Why does it feel like they're suddenly studying me, watching quietly, copying? Because when someone realizes they're outmatched, they stop mocking and start measuring. The laughter dries up and curiosity replaces it. Not healthy curiosity, desperate curiosity. the kind that tries to reverse engineer growth without understanding the cost behind it. They want the outcome without the process. They want the composure without the discipline. They want the confidence without the losses that forged it. But they can't replicate what they didn't endure. You didn't just upgrade skills, you upgraded standards. You raised the price of your attention. You changed how you allocate energy. And that's why they feel like they walked into a different league. Because leagues aren't defined by talent alone. They're defined by tolerance. What you tolerate, what you ignore, what you refuse to engage with. You stopped tolerating disrespect disguised as competition. You stopped engaging in debates that drained you. You stopped entertaining people committed to misunderstanding you. That's when the gap opened. Think of it like this. They trained to beat a sprinter. You became a marathoner. Same track, different understanding of distance. They burn out trying to keep up. You settle into rhythm, and when they finally look up, gasping, you're already beyond the point where they can even be seen as competition. That's why their words feel weaker now. That's why their presence feels smaller. Not because they shrank, but because your frame expanded. You didn't rise by pushing them down. You rose by lifting yourself out of range. And this is important, so hear it clearly. You don't owe them clarity. Confusion is the consequence of underestimating someone who kept evolving. Let them be confused. Let them misinterpret your silence. Let them replay old assumptions. Every second they spend stuck in the past is another second you stay ahead. Being chosen means you don't need to announce dominance. You demonstrate it through consistency, through composure, through the quiet refusal to be dragged back into outdated dynamics. You don't fight for position anymore, you hold it. So if they came looking for the old you and found someone they don't recognize, that's not accidental. That's earned. That's the result of you refusing to stagnate just to stay familiar. You changed the league by changing yourself. And the hardest part for them to accept? You did it without asking permission. Number 2, the evidence they can't imitate or explain away. You can fake confidence, but you can't fake results that were earned in silence. This is where everything changes for them. Because words can be argued with, stories can be twisted, narratives can be manipulated, but evidence? Evidence stands there without emotion, without explanation, without apology. And that's exactly what you've become, living, breathing proof of something they never believed would happen. They thought you were all talk in your head and no follow-through in real life. They assumed time would expose you as potential that never materialized. That's why they were comfortable doubting you. That's why they spoke so freely. They were betting against your consistency. They lost. What they're facing now isn't just your progress. It's the uncomfortable reality that your progress has no loopholes. There's nothing they can discredit, nothing they can reduce to luck, nothing they can dismiss as coincidence. You didn't jump levels overnight. You stacked them, slowly, relentlessly, in a way that leaves fingerprints everywhere. And this is the part that rattles them the most. They can see it, but they can't recreate it. They've tried, you can tell. They adopt similar language, similar habits, similar aesthetics. They mimic the surface because that's all they can access. But imitation collapses quickly when it isn't backed by substance. Because what you built didn't come from copying anyone. It came from repetition under pressure. You didn't perform growth, you produced it. That distinction matters more than people realize. You see, they were used to a world where image outruns effort, where talking about progress earns more attention than actually making it. They assumed that was the same game you were playing. That's why they underestimated you. They thought you were competing in appearance, when in reality you were competing in outcomes. So now they're stuck. They can't explain how you pulled ahead without shortcuts. They can't understand how you stayed disciplined without external validation. They can't make sense of how you kept moving when there was no applause. And when people can't explain something, they either respect it or resent it. You already know which one they chose. If you're wondering, why does it feel like they're quieter now? It's because evidence forces silence. When results show up consistently, excuses lose oxygen. There's nothing left to debate. The conversation ends before it starts. All that's left is comparison, and comparison is brutal when the gap is visible. They used to question your direction. Now they question their own decisions. That's the psychological shift you're watching in real time. Your evidence didn't just elevate you, it destabilized them because their confidence was never rooted in growth. It was rooted in contrast. As long as you stayed where you were, they felt ahead. The moment you moved forward without permission, their position stopped making sense. And here's the surprise they didn't see coming. Your evidence doesn't announce itself. You don't post every step. You don't explain every move. You don't defend your pace. You let outcomes accumulate quietly. That's why they struggle to track you. They're used to loud progress. Yours shows up already finished, already solid, already undeniable. It's like watching someone arrive at the destination without remembering when they left. That kind of progress unsettles people who rely on performance. Because performance needs witnesses, real work doesn't. And now the proof sits there like a closed case. No argument, no debate, no revision. You might be asking yourself, why does this feel heavier than winning? Because evidence changes dynamics permanently. Wins can be temporary. Evidence rewrites status. Once people see what you're capable of sustaining, not just achieving, they adjust how they treat you. Not out of admiration, but out of caution. They feel it now. The distance, the difference. The fact that they can't talk to you the same way anymore. You didn't demand respect. You made disrespect impractical. That's what being chosen looks like in real terms. Not spotlight, not praise, but the ability to move in a way that forces others to update their assumptions. You became someone whose progress requires effort to keep up with, not commentary to keep down. And the reason they can't imitate it is simple. Your evidence is built from habits they don't have the patience for, from consistency they don't maintain, from restraint they never practiced. You were willing to be unseen. They weren't. You were willing to be misunderstood. They needed approval. You were willing to stay quiet until the work spoke. Now the work is speaking, and it's saying everything you never needed to. So let them watch, let them guess, let them struggle to explain what they're seeing. The evidence doesn't need interpretation, it exists, and every day it compounds. It widens the gap between those who perform success and those who quietly produce it. You didn't just move ahead, you made imitation irrelevant. Number 3, the moment your progress made them question themselves. The day your progress forced them to doubt their own reflection. Nothing unsettles a person faster than realizing the one they dismissed is now the standard they measure themselves against. This is the moment everything turned uncomfortable for them. Not when you started, not when you struggled, not even when you failed publicly. They were fine then, comfortable even. Because your uncertainty fed their confidence. Your questions reassured their answers. Your slow climb made their shortcuts feel justified. As long as you stayed in the role they assigned you, everything made sense to them. But then your progress stopped fitting the story. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it wasn't announced. It showed up subtly at first, in the way you spoke less but said more, in the way your decisions carried weight, in the way you stopped reacting to things that once pulled you in. They felt it before they saw it. A quiet shift, like standing next to someone and realizing they're no longer looking up or sideways, but straight ahead. That's when the questions started forming in their mind, uninvited and persistent. When did this happen? How did they get here? What did I miss? And here's the part that hits them hardest. Those questions aren't about you, they're about themselves. Your progress didn't just move you forward. It exposed the distance between where they are and where they thought they'd be by now. You became a walking comparison they never agreed to, but can't escape. Every step you take forward quietly asks them a question they don't want to answer. Why didn't I do the same? That's why their energy around you changed. The jokes lost confidence, the comments became backhanded, the praise, when it comes, feels forced or delayed. Because progress is confrontational when it comes from someone you once underestimated. It doesn't feel inspiring to them. It feels accusatory, like a mirror they didn't consent to stand in front of. And if you're wondering, why do they seem defensive now? Why do they minimize what I've done? It's because minimizing you is the only way they can temporarily protect their self-image. If your growth is real, then their stagnation is undeniable. And that's a reality most people would rather argue with than accept. This is where being chosen starts to feel isolating. Not because you think you're better, but because your trajectory no longer matches the comfort level of the people who used to feel ahead of you. You didn't leap forward magically. You compounded, slowly, consistently. You kept promises to yourself when no one was watching. You refined habits while others repeated excuses. And now the gap is wide enough that pretending it doesn't exist takes effort. They feel that effort. You can see it in how they watch you now, not casually, not confidently, carefully, as if one more piece of evidence might force them to confront something they've been avoiding. They scroll longer. They listen closer. They replay conversations in their head, trying to pinpoint where they misjudged you. And here's the truth they won't say out loud. Your progress broke their sense of superiority. They didn't lose to you directly. They lost to time, discipline, and self-honesty, qualities you developed while they were busy maintaining an image. That's why this hits deeper than any argument ever could. You didn't beat them publicly. You surpassed them quietly, and quiet progress gives no warning. Chosen ones don't announce growth. They reveal it accidentally. That's what makes it disruptive. You didn't confront them. You continued. You didn't correct their assumptions. You outlived them. And now they're left questioning not just their opinion of you, but their opinion of themselves. That's a heavy thing to carry. Heavier than jealousy, heavier than anger. It's doubt turned inward. So if you've noticed them pulling away, acting strange, or suddenly becoming critical, understand this. That's not dislike. That's discomfort. You've become evidence they can't unsee. Proof that growth was possible, and time was available, and effort mattered. Your progress didn't embarrass them publicly, it confronted them privately, and that's why it lingers. This is where you must stay steady. Don't explain yourself. Don't shrink to make them comfortable. Don't rush to reassure people who are questioning their own path because of yours. Your job isn't to manage their feelings. Your job is to keep moving forward with clarity. Being chosen doesn't mean being celebrated by everyone. It means being misunderstood by those who stayed the same while you changed. And that's fine. That's expected. Progress always creates tension before it creates respect. Let them question. Let them wrestle with it. Let them sit with the realization that you didn't rise because you were lucky, but because you were consistent. That realization is doing more work on them than anything you could ever say. And the most surprising part, you're just getting started. Number 4, when your time became too valuable for their access. There was a moment, subtle but irreversible, when your time stopped being available on demand. Not because you announced it, not because you made a speech or set a dramatic boundary. It happened quietly, the way real power always does. One day, you simply stopped responding the way you used to. You stopped explaining delays. You stopped justifying absence. And that's when it hit them. Access to you was no longer guaranteed. Nothing offends insecure people more than realizing they're no longer a priority. That realization cuts deeper than rejection ever could. For a long time, they were used to you being reachable. Your attention was predictable. Your availability made them comfortable. They could provoke, interrupt, or dismiss you, knowing you'd still show up, still engage, still care. That availability wasn't weakness, but they treated it like it was. They mistook your openness for lack of value. And when something is treated as cheap for too long, people assume it will always be there, until it isn't. Now they feel the absence, not dramatically, but persistently. Messages unanswered, invitations ignored, energy not returned. And what confuses them most is that you didn't replace them with noise. You replaced them with focus. That's what stings. Because if you had vanished into chaos, they could dismiss it. But you didn't disappear. You elevated. This is where they start asking questions they never had to ask before. When did this change? Why don't they respond the same? Why does it feel like I'm the one waiting now? The balance has shifted, and they can't pretend it hasn't. Your time became selective. Your presence became intentional. And suddenly, the dynamic they relied on collapsed. You see, chosen ones eventually learn a lesson that others resist their entire lives. Time is not infinite, and attention is not free. You realize that every minute you gave away without purpose was a minute stolen from growth. Every unnecessary conversation was an energy leak. Every interaction that led nowhere was a quiet delay in your evolution. So you adjusted, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And clarity is expensive. That's why your absence feels heavier than your presence ever did. When you were available, they took you lightly. Now that you're not, they feel the weight of what they lost. They're not missing conversation. They're missing relevance. They're missing the version of themselves that felt important simply because you were around. People don't miss you when you're gone. They miss how important they felt when you were present. That's the truth they don't like admitting. Your time becoming valuable didn't just inconvenience them, it exposed them. It revealed who was there for access versus who was there for alignment. And those who were only around because you were easy to reach now feel locked out of a room they never realized was a privilege. This is where the resentment creeps in. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're distant. They'll imply arrogance. But what they're really reacting to is loss of control. They can no longer summon you with a message. They can no longer disrupt your focus with drama. They can no longer count on your energy to fill gaps in their own life. And here's what you might be thinking right now. Why does protecting my time feel uncomfortable? Why does it feel like I'm doing something wrong? Because you were conditioned to equate accessibility with kindness. You were taught that being available made you valuable. But the truth is the opposite. Scarcity reveals worth. Precision commands respect. You didn't become cold. You became disciplined. Your time is now invested, not spent, and investments always have gatekeepers. That's why they're suddenly more polite, more curious, more interested. When access disappears, value skyrockets. They're realizing that the version of you they had unlimited access to was the most generous version, and they didn't treat it like it mattered. Now it does. They can feel the distance, but they don't know how to cross it, because the distance isn't physical. It's internal. You're no longer operating on impulse. You're operating on intention, and intention doesn't respond to entitlement. Being chosen means reaching a point where you stop managing other people's comfort and start managing your own capacity. You don't answer everything. You don't attend everything. You don't explain everything. And the people who benefited from your overextension feel that shift like a sudden drop in temperature. But here's the part that matters most. You didn't do this to punish them. You did it to protect yourself. And protection always looks like rejection to those who were overreaching. So let them feel it. Let them notice. Let them adjust or drift away. Your job isn't to reopen access. Your job is to honor the version of yourself that finally understood this truth. Your time isn't expensive because you're busy. It's expensive because you're becoming. Number 5, you stopped talking and the results took over. When the results speak, explanations become unnecessary. That's the moment everything changed. Not when you said something clever, not when you defended yourself, not when you finally found the right words. It changed when you went quiet and let reality answer for you. They were prepared for arguments. They were prepared for excuses. They were prepared for emotional reactions they could twist and use. What they weren't prepared for was outcomes. Solid, visible, undeniable outcomes that made every past opinion collapse on impact. For a long time, they were comfortable because you were accessible. You explained yourself. You clarified intentions. You tried to be understood by people who were committed to misunderstanding you. Talking made them feel equal. Conversation gave them leverage. As long as words were exchanged, they felt like the game was still open. But the second you stopped explaining and started executing, the power balance snapped. You didn't announce the shift. You didn't warn anyone. You simply withdrew your voice and redirected that energy into action. While they were still debating narratives, you were changing circumstances. While they were trying to control perception, you were building substance. And that's when the noise stopped working. Because results don't argue, results don't need context, results don't need defense, results don't ask for permission to exist, they just stand there. And that's what made them uncomfortable. Your silence wasn't absence, it was concentration. You weren't avoiding confrontation, you were replacing it with proof. Every time they expected a response and got progress instead, it forced them to confront something they couldn't talk their way out of. The story they told about you stopped matching what was happening in front of them. That creates panic. People who rely on words fear environments where only outcomes matter, because outcomes expose effort, discipline, and consistency. Things that can't be faked long term. They could always debate you. They could always twist a conversation, but they couldn't twist results without looking ridiculous. So they started losing ground quietly. You may have noticed it. The way their tone softened, the way their comments became indirect, the way criticism turned into silence or strange curiosity. That's not maturity. That's someone realizing they no longer have authority in the conversation because the conversation itself ended. And here's the part you might not have realized yet. Stopping talking wasn't passive. It was strategic. You didn't go quiet because you had nothing to say. You went quiet because saying less forced the truth to say more. Every action you took became amplified because there was no commentary attached to it. No excuses, no justifications, no distractions, just movement. That's when you crossed into a different level. People who haven't built anything think silence means insecurity. But people who've built no silence means control. You don't interrupt a process that's working. You don't explain momentum. You protect it. And once you understood that, you stopped feeding energy into arguments that went nowhere and started feeding systems that produced results. That's why your opponent feels unworthy now. Not because you embarrassed them publicly, but because you outgrew the space where their voice mattered. They're still trying to talk about you, but the conversation feels outdated. Like reviewing a trailer after the movie's already finished. Their words lag behind your reality. And if you're wondering, why does it feel like they're struggling to respond now? It's because results force accountability. Silence backed by progress leaves no room for denial. They can't argue with what's visible. They can't dismiss consistency. They can't minimize something that keeps showing up. So instead they retreat. They watch, they measure, they replay moments when they thought they were ahead. And that's where the humiliation comes in, even if no one says it out loud. You didn't raise your voice. You raised your standard. You didn't win the argument. You made arguments irrelevant. That's a different kind of dominance. The kind that doesn't need witnesses to be real. Being chosen isn't about proving intelligence or strength through words. It's about knowing when words are inefficient. You reached a point where talking felt like a delay, where explaining felt like regression, where silence felt cleaner, faster, more aligned with where you were going. And once you crossed that threshold, the results took over naturally. They started speaking on your behalf. They answered questions you never responded to. They closed debates you never entered. They made people rethink assumptions without you lifting a finger. That's when you became untouchable, not because you fought harder, but because you stopped fighting altogether. So if you feel less talkative now, less reactive, less interested in defending your name, that's not disconnection, that's elevation. That's you operating in a space where effort is visible and noise is optional. Let them keep talking. Let them keep explaining. Let them keep trying to keep up verbally. You already moved past that phase. You stopped talking, and everything that mattered started showing. Number 6. The collapse of someone who thought they were untouchable. They didn't think they could lose, not to you, not ever. In their mind, their position was permanent, their advantage guaranteed, their status locked in. They moved through life with the quiet arrogance of someone who believes gravity doesn't apply to them. You were supposed to stay in your lane, beneath their line of sight, useful only as a comparison point. And for a long time, that illusion worked. Not because it was true, but because you didn't challenge it. Until you did, without announcing it. The collapse didn't happen all at once. That's what makes it so devastating. It started internally, the moment they realized their influence over you was gone, the moment their words stopped landing, the moment their presence stopped mattering. People who think they're untouchable don't fear confrontation, they fear irrelevance. And you became the source of that fear the second you stopped reacting. They were used to control disguised as confidence. Used to being centered in every dynamic, used to you explaining yourself, adjusting your tone, second-guessing your moves. They mistook your restraint for dependence. But what they never understood is that you were studying the system while they were enjoying the spotlight. You were learning patterns, limits, pressure points. And when you finally stepped back, the system they relied on collapsed under its own weight. That's when the panic set in. You could see it in the shift. The forced smiles, the sudden curiosity, the awkward attempts to reinsert themselves into your space. When someone believes they're untouchable, they don't prepare for being ignored. They don't have the tools for humility. So when reality finally checks them, it doesn't bruise their ego, it shatters it. And here's what hits them hardest. You didn't expose them. You didn't attack. You didn't announce their fall. You simply stopped holding them up. Their power was never independent. It was relational. It existed because you once responded, once cared, once played your role. When you exited emotionally, the structure fell apart. That's why their collapse feels so dramatic to them and so quiet to everyone else. There's no explosion, just a slow realization that the room doesn't revolve around them anymore. You might wonder why they seem angrier now than when you were struggling. That's because struggle made you useful to their narrative. Your growth erased it. When someone builds their identity on being above you, your rise forces them to confront something they've been avoiding their entire life, their own limits. They thought they were untouchable because no one ever challenged them by outgrowing them. You did. And you did it without asking permission or seeking validation. That's the part that rewrites the hierarchy. You didn't defeat them in public. You defeated the idea that they were untouchable in the first place. Once that illusion cracked, everything else followed. Their authority felt hollow. Their confidence felt loud instead of solid. Their attempts to reassert dominance came off desperate instead of commanding. You didn't need to push them off the pedestal. You simply stepped high enough that the pedestal stopped mattering. This is what chosen ones do differently. They don't compete for titles. They change the measurement system. While others are fighting for rank, you're building capacity. While others protect their image, you're refining your foundation. And when the foundation is strong enough, image collapses on its own. The person who thought they were untouchable never planned for this version of you. They prepared for resistance, not withdrawal, for argument, not silence, for rivalry, not transcendence. And now they're stuck trying to provoke a response from someone who has already moved past the need to prove anything. That's why their collapse feels personal to them. Because it is. It's the collapse of a false self they maintained by comparison. Without you playing your old role, they don't know who they are. And that confusion is louder than any insult they ever threw your way. Understand this clearly. Their downfall is not your responsibility. You didn't cause it by rising. You revealed it by refusing to stay small. The moment you chose growth over reaction, alignment over approval, progress over performance, the imbalance corrected itself. They thought they were untouchable because they never imagined you would detach. Now they're learning the hard truth. Power that depends on someone else's silence was never real power at all. Number 7. You built quietly while they performed loudly. Noise is what people make when they're afraid silence will expose them. That line alone explains everything they still don't understand about you. While they were busy making sure everyone saw them trying, you were focused on making sure something actually worked. While they were broadcasting effort, you were stacking results where no one was watching. They confused visibility with progress. You understood something most people never do. The loudest phase is rarely the most productive one. They performed, you constructed. And now the difference is impossible to hide. At the time, it didn't look impressive. No announcements, no dramatic updates, no constant proof-of-life posts begging for recognition. Just distance, just focus, just consistency that didn't need witnesses. That's why they underestimated you. They assumed that if they couldn't see it, it wasn't happening. They assumed silence meant stagnation. They were wrong. You weren't quiet because you lacked ambition. You were quiet because you had a plan, and plans don't need applause. They need time. Think about it. Anyone can talk about what they're going to do. Anyone can perform motivation. Anyone can dress up effort and sell potential. But building something real requires boredom, repetition, restraint. It requires doing the same unglamorous thing long after the excitement wears off. Most people can't survive that phase. That's why they stay loud. Noise distracts them from the lack of progress. You didn't need distraction. You needed depth. So while they were chasing reactions, you were chasing precision. While they were optimizing for attention, you were optimizing for durability. You weren't trying to look ahead, you were trying to stay ahead. And that's why, when the results finally surfaced, they felt blindsided. They thought you disappeared. You were actually upgrading. That's what hits them hardest now. The realization that while they were watching each other, you were working alone. While they were comparing timelines, you were compounding effort. While they were arguing about who was winning, you were quietly removing yourself from the race altogether. And if you're asking yourself, why do they suddenly seem interested now? Why do they want to know what I'm doing? It's because performance collapses when it's exposed next to substance. Their volume can't compete with your foundation. Their highlight reels don't hold up against your structure. They built an image. You built capacity. That's why their success feels fragile and yours feels stable. Because you didn't rush to be seen. You rushed to be ready. You understood that exposure too early weakens momentum. That when everyone knows your next move, they also know how to interfere with it. So you protected your process. You kept your progress offline. You let curiosity grow while you stayed disciplined. They thought secrecy meant insecurity. In reality, it meant control. Now the roles are reversed. They're scrambling to explain outcomes they can't fake. They're trying to retrofit meaning onto performance that never matured into results. And they can feel it, the difference in weight, the difference in presence. When you speak now, it lands heavier. When you move, it's decisive. Because you're not improvising, you're executing something that's been tested in silence. This is where their discomfort comes from. They can't figure out when you became this composed, this efficient, this unmoved by things that used to matter. And the truth is, you didn't become this overnight. You earned it quietly while they were busy being seen. That's the power of being chosen, not chosen by luck, chosen by endurance, chosen because you didn't fold when nobody was clapping, chosen because you didn't need validation to stay consistent, chosen because you were willing to look invisible for a while in exchange for being undeniable later. They didn't lose because you beat them publicly. They lost because you outgrew the need to compete loudly. Now their performance feels empty next to your results. Their noise feels desperate next to your calm. Their explanations feel thin next to your proof. And deep down, they know it. That's why they talk more now. That's why they post more now. That's why they suddenly want attention from the same space you've already outgrown. They're trying to stay relevant. You're focused on staying effective, so don't second-guess the quiet seasons. Don't regret the times you weren't seen. That silence was doing more work than their noise ever could. It filtered distractions. It sharpened judgment. It built something solid enough to stand without constant maintenance. You didn't fall behind by going quiet. You pulled ahead by staying focused. And now, when the noise fades and the performance exhausts itself, what remains is what you built. Something they can see now, but can't recreate. Because by the time they realized silence was the advantage, you were already finished building. That's why they feel unworthy now. They finally understand the difference between someone who talks about progress and someone who quietly becomes it. Number 8. Your growth turned into their public reality check. They laughed first. That's always how it starts. Not because they were confident, but because laughter is the easiest way to hide discomfort when someone else is quietly progressing. For a long time, your growth was invisible to them, which made it safe to dismiss you. You were an idea they could control, a story they could twist, a name they could mention casually without consequence. But the moment your progress became visible, everything changed. What used to be private doubt on their side turned into a public reality check they couldn't escape. Your growth didn't announce itself. It arrived. And arrival is loud in its own way. Suddenly, the same people who once spoke loosely about you started choosing their words more carefully. They weren't celebrating you. They were recalibrating. Because when someone you underestimated starts producing undeniable results, it forces an uncomfortable audit, not of you, but of them. Your progress didn't just challenge their opinions. It exposed the shortcuts they took, the excuses they made, and the time they wasted convincing themselves they were ahead. This is where the shift becomes visible to everyone else. You didn't need to explain your journey or justify your pace. Your consistency spoke for you. Every step forward, every quiet upgrade, every improvement became a mirror held up to those who once felt superior. And mirrors are ruthless. They don't soften the image. They don't negotiate. They simply reflect what is there. Your growth reflected discipline, patience, and focus. Their reflection showed stagnation, distraction, and comfort. You might be wondering why their energy feels tense now, why conversations feel awkward, why compliments sound forced or delayed. It's because your growth put them in a position they never planned for, having to acknowledge you without being able to control the narrative. They can't frame you as potential anymore. Potential is safe. Potential doesn't threaten, but progress does. Progress changes dynamics. Progress removes hierarchy that was built on assumption rather than substance. What makes this a public reality check is that it didn't happen in isolation. Others noticed too. The room shifted. The audience adjusted. People who once followed their lead started paying attention to you. Not because you demanded it, but because progress attracts focus the same way gravity attracts weight. And when attention moves, power follows. That's the part they didn't anticipate. Your growth didn't just elevate you, it redistributed influence. For a long time, they could laugh because there was no evidence to contradict their story. Now the evidence exists, and it exists publicly. Every win, every visible upgrade, every sign of momentum invalidates the version of reality they were comfortable living in. They can't laugh without looking insecure. They can't dismiss you without looking dishonest. So they retreat into observation, hoping silence will hide the impact. It doesn't. This is the uncomfortable truth about being chosen. Your progress forces honesty in people who would rather stay delusional. You didn't set out to embarrass anyone. You didn't compete loudly. You didn't seek validation. But growth has consequences. When someone builds their confidence on being above you, your rise removes the foundation beneath them. That's not cruelty. That's math. They are now being confronted with questions they avoided for years. Why didn't I push harder? Why did I settle? Why did I spend more time watching than building? Your growth doesn't ask these questions out loud. It simply exists, and that existence is enough to force reflection. Some people rise from that moment, others resent it. Either way, the truth has entered the room. You'll notice something else too. The people who once spoke over you now listen more than they talk. The ones who dismissed you now observe quietly. Not out of respect yet, but out of recalculation. They are trying to understand how the shift happened without admitting they misjudged you. That's why the recognition feels delayed and awkward. It's not generosity, it's damage control. And this is where your power solidifies. You don't need to react to any of it. You don't need to clarify or confront. Your growth already delivered the message. It told them that effort compounds, that consistency outpaces charisma, and that quiet focus outlasts loud opinions. You became proof that progress doesn't need permission to become public. Being chosen doesn't mean being celebrated immediately. It means being undeniable eventually. And now that undeniability has arrived. Not as noise, not as drama, but as a visible reality that others have to adjust to. Your growth became the checkpoint they didn't train for. The moment they realized the story they told about you no longer matched the facts. Let that be your motivation. Not their discomfort, but your clarity. You didn't change to impress. You changed to evolve. And in doing so, you turned growth into something powerful, a public signal that discipline beats dismissal, and that anyone who underestimates you will eventually be forced to confront the truth in front of everyone else. Number 9. Proof became your shield, and silence became your power. There was a time when you felt the need to explain yourself, to defend your name, to correct every lie, every rumor, every false assumption thrown in your direction. Back then, it felt logical, fair even. If someone misunderstood you, you clarified. If they doubted you, you responded. But somewhere along the journey, something clicked. You realized that words were costing you more than they were protecting you. And that's when the shift happened. You stopped talking, not because you had nothing to say, but because you finally understood that proof speaks in a language arguments can't compete with. This is the moment your longtime opponent didn't see coming. They were prepared for debates, reactions, explanations. They built their confidence on the idea that they could always out-talk you, out-frame you, outspin the narrative. What they weren't prepared for was silence backed by results, silence backed by consistency, silence backed by visible progress that didn't require captions or justification. That kind of silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, and it presses down on them every time they realize their words don't land the way they used to. Proof is brutal like that. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't chase agreement. It just exists. And once it exists, it rewrites the entire power dynamic. Suddenly, the person who was talking the most has the least credibility. Suddenly, the one who stayed quiet holds all the leverage. Your opponent feels it instinctively. They can't poke holes in what's visible. They can't argue with outcomes. They can't discredit progress without exposing their own bias. So they do the only thing left. They watch. And that watching eats at them, because every time they check in, every time they compare timelines, every time they replay the past, they're confronted with the same uncomfortable truth. You didn't need to prove yourself to beat them. You didn't need validation to move forward. You didn't need their approval to evolve. You just kept going. And now the gap between who you are and who they thought you'd be has become impossible to ignore. If you're asking yourself, why does my silence bother them so much? It's because silence removes their sense of control. When you argued back, they felt involved. When you reacted, they felt relevant. But silence cuts them off from the feedback loop they relied on to feel superior. Your quiet doesn't give them material. It doesn't confirm their assumptions. It leaves them alone with their thoughts, and that's the last place they want to be, because that's where comparison lives. That's where regret starts talking. Proof doesn't just protect your reputation, it shields your energy. It creates distance between you and anything that's built on noise instead of substance. When your life starts reflecting discipline, growth, and direction, lies struggle to survive around you. They lose traction, they float without weight. People stop asking questions because the answers are visible, and the ones who once tried to define you are forced into silence themselves, not out of respect, but out of defeat. This is why your opponent now feels unworthy, even if they never say it out loud. Not because you embarrassed them publicly, but because your existence quietly contradicts everything they claimed about you. They told themselves a story where they were ahead, superior, untouchable. Your proof collapsed that story without confrontation. And nothing humbles faster than realizing the narrative you built your confidence on was wrong. You didn't become powerful by being louder. You became powerful by becoming undeniable. You stopped wasting time clearing your name and started building a life that made clarification unnecessary. That's not avoidance, that's efficiency. That's understanding where real influence comes from. Influence isn't convincing people you're capable, it's making it obvious. And here's the part that matters most for you to remember. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't luck. This was the result of you choosing restraint when reacting felt easier. Choosing patience when proving yourself felt urgent. Choosing progress when distraction was tempting. That's the discipline of someone who was never meant to stay in the same lane. Your silence isn't passive, it's strategic. It allows you to move without interference. It keeps your plans unpolluted. It denies access to people who would drain momentum instead of contributing to it. And when silence is paired with proof, it becomes a form of authority. You don't have to announce boundaries, they feel them. You don't have to assert dominance, it's understood. So when your longtime opponent looks at you now and feels smaller, understand why. They're standing in front of evidence they can't dismiss and silence they can't penetrate. They don't know how to compete with someone who no longer competes. They don't know how to challenge someone who let results do all the talking. And that's the surprise they never prepared for. You didn't win by fighting harder. You won by outlasting, outgrowing, and outproducing. Proof became your shield. Silence became your power. And together they moved you so far ahead that the idea of opposition no longer makes sense. And this is where everything comes together. What once felt like pressure turned into clarity, and what once felt like opposition became proof of how far you've come. You didn't force the shift, you earned it. Your growth spoke when words were no longer necessary, and that's why the balance changed in your favor. If this message resonated with you, like this video to help it reach others on the same path. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, mindset-shifting content. Drop the number 77 in the comments if you felt this truth. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs the reminder.